Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Call of Cthulhu adventure, The Code. Written by Christopher Lackey with Lynne Hardy, the adventure appears in 2020's Mansions of Madness Volume 1. I've previously talked about the old 6th edition version of Mansions of Madness, with reviews for The Cracked and Crooked Manse, Mr. Corbett, and Mansion of Madness. The updated version took 2 of those original adventures, updated them to 7th edition, added a few details, and then added 3 entirely new adventures to that collection, The Code being one of them. Now, hopefully, Volume 2 will be released sometime soon, with the rest of the original adventures included and with a couple new ones, but I don't know when or if that's going to be. Coming in at 34 pages, the adventure initially seems bigger than it is, but once you remove the handouts and the maps, the scenario is really just 20 pages and is fully playable in just a single 4-hour session. It can also only be played with only a single player if you wish, but it could also handle 3 to 4 players because it's very easy to scale the threats in this adventure. In fact, there's a very heavy improv factor to it, meaning that the adventure could easily be extended out. Keepers could just add a little bit more threats and weirdness, or keepers could just shorten it up to make for a shorter adventure. It also recommends that the player characters have just a little bit of mythos experience before the adventure starts. Other useful skills that it recommends are electrical repair, listen, mechanical repair, occult, psychology, stealth, and at least one player character with a high physics skill. The player characters don't need to know one another before the adventure starts, so we could use this thing to start off a brand new campaign, or we could use it as a good way to bring in a new player character to an existing campaign. The scenario is set in 1925 in upstate New York, but that can easily be changed for the year or location just to suit your campaign. Now, for full disclosure, I did not run this adventure myself. John Hook, my co-host on the Modern Mythos podcast, he absolutely loves this adventure, and when he learned that I hadn't read it, insisted that he run me through it as a player, and I was really happy to let him.
Holy crap, you get to play a lot more these days. I mean, you just had to make an award-winning YouTube channel and get over 100,000 subscribers just to find a game master, but hey, what you gotta do is what you gotta do. So, you survived this one?
Technically, maybe. I was lost in time and forever accelerating towards the heat death of the universe.
So that would be a no then, which you know what? That is great, because you're really staying on brand. You've been surviving way too many of these one-shots lately, and I think your game masters have been taking it a little easy on you.
That's a good point. But now that I have completed the adventure and I've gotten a chance to read it for myself, I'm going to offer my tips and my criticisms and a few ideas that a keeper might use for their own game.
And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm mostly here to tell jokes and just break up the monotony of staring at his yammering face.
But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. Hot, juicy, delicious spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. But send your game masters this way to see about running the code for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, you'll have to do that time warp again. And again. And again. Okay, keepers, let's do this. But first, the backstory. 5 years ago, Dr. Kenneth Conley inherited a manor in upstate New York. The inheritance allowed him the freedom to pursue a time travel project that he'd been theorizing, combining physics and metaphysics, so he took early retirement from Miskatonic University. Last year, while researching some information in Chicago, he met Eve Pierce, a professional con artist and minor sorceress. Recognizing the potential of his work, she introduced herself to him as Lizzie Rowland, and she seduced him and went back home to New York to work as his assistant. However, Eve's former lover and partner in crime, Clint Davis, tracked her down, suspecting that she was working a big score. Panicked that he'd blow her cover, she introduced him to Dr. Conley as her brother David, and who needed to stay with them for a little while. Conley agreed, but began to grow suspicious after overhearing an argument between the two of them. So to ensure the safety of the time suit that he was building, he installed a security code on it, and then he sent a letter with the code off to a trusted friend, not divulging what it was for, but that the friend needed to keep this code safe. Which was a good thing that he did that, because shortly after that, Dr. Conley had a breakthrough in his time suit, jumping 10 minutes into the future. Clint, who was spying on all this and realized what the secret project was all about, drew his gun and shot Conley dead. It was then that Eve realized that the code that Conley had given her was bogus, but she knew that Conley had recently sent a letter off to an old friend, and she suspected that he had given send that friend a backup, whatever that code was. But she didn't know which friend it was, so she went through his address book and sent out a telegram pretending to be Dr. Conley to the most likely candidates and hoping that one of them would have the code and that they would come to his house. Which brings us to the player characters. All of them know Dr. Conley from years before, so find out what their relationship to him is. Maybe they were old college friends or old war buddies, whatever. Maybe you can tell the player characters or the players how their characters know Dr. Conley, or maybe keepers could kind of work it out with the player to figure out, kind of a good way that their character would know him. If you are running more than one player, just choose the one that is most likely to receive this letter from him. Now, if you're going to have more than one character in it, it might be a cool idea to give each of them one half of the code. Like maybe one of them gets the front half and the other gets the second half because he didn't trust the code to any one person. Then give each of the player characters the telegram handout asking them to come to the house.
Hey, I got a telegram from Dr. Kenneth Conley, my old college chum, colleague, lover, war buddy. Oh, I'm supposed to pick one. War buddy. Yeah. Dr. Conley and I, we knew each other back in the war. Good old Kenny. He and I were cryptographers together. Yeah, because this adventure's the code, and now I know cryptography. Write that down. I know cryptography now. I learned it in the war from Dr. Conley. Yeah, he and I had a lot of great times together. In fact, I seem to remember getting a letter from him not that long ago.
Arriving at the house, the adventure gives us both a keeper map and a player map. The characters are going to see other cars that are already parked there, and then knocking on the door, they're going to meet Clint Davis, who's now posing himself as William Fetter, Dr. Conley's servant and groundskeeper. Davis has recently shaved his head and mustache. However, the picture shows him with very short hair and no mustache, so I suppose this is the picture of him after he's gone through this, but we don't really have a picture of what he looked like before he went through it, and I kind of wish that we had both a before and after picture for reasons I'm going to get into. However, I also suggest that the player characters, when they see him, maybe give them an option of a spot hidden roll, and they can see that his head has been recently shaven as the scalp is paler than the rest of the skin, or maybe when they first meet him, when he first introduces himself, maybe he's wearing a hat or a cap or something, and then later on in the adventure, he can take that off, and that's when the player characters have an opportunity to recognize that his head is a little bit too pale for somebody that's got hair that short normally, and that might work as a bit of a clue that he has recently changed his appearance. The map of the house also comes with keeper and player versions, which I do appreciate Chaosium providing those. Inside they'll meet 3 people. 2 are NPCs that also receive telegrams, and the third is Eve Pierce, now posing as Claire Whitley, a colleague of Dr. Conley's from Chicago, who claims that she also received an invitation letter as well. Eve has dyed her hair black, just in case Conley described her and Clint Davis in that letter that was sent out. Again, I wish we had a before and after picture of what she looked like the blonde and the brunette versions, because once again, that's going to be handy later on. So Eve and Clint have buried Dr. Conley a couple miles out in the woods, and they're hoping that the guests are going to look through the notes and see the machine here, notice the code box that's on the schematics, and reveal which of them has the code that you would put in there. Now, Eve has detached and hidden the box up in the attic to prevent anybody from activating the time suit and maybe, disrupting her plans or everything. So they're also going to have to search the house to figure out where this little code box is. But once they have the code and they know who's got it and they've got it secure, they're just going to go ahead and kill everybody.
Guys, according to these notes right here, we just got to enter a code into the suit in order to activate it. And it just so happens that Dr. Conley sent me that code 2 weeks ago. He told me I should memorize it and burn the letter afterwards, but I got that letter right here.
If any of the player characters are dumb enough to ignore the letter warnings and immediately reveal that they've got the code even though it told them specifically not to, well, the adventure timeline is going to rapidly accelerate. But even Clint, they're not going to just pull out their guns and just start blasting everybody right there. They're probably going to start kind of isolating and eliminating them, maybe 1 or 2 at a time, as they kind of split up and they search the house looking for this code box. So we kind of do get to keep it going a little bit longer, just not as long if they decided not to tell about everybody immediately that they had this code. Alternatively, the player might not reveal to anyone around the table at all that they have the code and what the code is. They might not trust anybody there because they're all strangers to them. And if that happens, it's not going to slow the game down in any way or hinder the other player characters too much. It's going to be more like a secret mission that one player has for the one that has the code, as they're trying to figure out who exactly it is they should trust, because they're the only one that Dr. Conley fully trusted. So don't worry if they keep that code to themselves, and don't railroad the player character or the player into sharing it. Now, the murderous con artists, they're only the first threat here. The real threat is that energies that are emanating from the suit are causing all sorts of temporal anomalies in the immediate area, and those anomalies are escalating. The first ones they experience are going to be pretty mundane. Shortly after their arrival, they're going to hear footsteps out in the hall, but if they go out and they look outside the door, there's nobody there. But instead of them just being footsteps outside the hall, which, isn't too strange, you hear footsteps outside all the time. And, it doesn't necessarily say that it's Dr. Conley. It could just be that servant guy that they saw earlier walking along. So I suggest that you give Dr. Conley a distinct walk, like a limp, or maybe he walks with a cane, or something that's recognizable as being his specific footsteps. That way, when the player characters hear those footsteps outside and then no one opens the door, they've got a reason to go out and check the hallway to see their old friend. Now, how the adventure goes once they all arrive and what happens next, that's going to be largely freeform from there. The big hard part is just getting them into the house. And we get a lot of various suggestions of temporal anomalies we could use, ranging from running into past versions of themselves, or running into Clint at one point, who's now this crazy old man who's attacking him with an axe, or we might get chased by a pack of wolves.
Holy crap, out of all the things that happened to us in this adventure, opening up a door to see that it was snowing inside the house and then getting chased by a pack of timber wolves through the hallways, that was by far the scariest part. We were locked inside a bedroom for God knows how long, even after they stopped clawing at the doors, because we were afraid they were still out there.
Now, the module has it that when an anomaly ends, it just sort of winks out, like somebody's standing there and then boom, they're gone. Now, my suggestion, at least at the very beginning, when they first encounter a couple of these anomalies, have it be where the player characters never see them vanish. They might see somebody kind of go around a corner, or, then maybe they fighting them and they fall down some stairs or fall behind a piece of furniture or something. And the minute that the player character loses sight of them, that's when you have them vanish. But, don't let the PC just suddenly watch them wink out.
Yeah, that adds a good bit of the creepy factor to it, because you're never quite sure if the bad guy is still there or not.
Now, one interesting anomaly is the T'Challaks, which are kind of like the mantis men from the future, who, long after humanity is gone, they can detect these anomalies going on in the time stream, so they can go backwards in time in order to check those out. So they don't mess with the player characters out of fear of messing up the timeline and possibly, ruining their own present. So they're more like passive observers. Now, personally, I feel that the mere presence of these things would risk damaging the timeline. If these things are so smart, they would probably know that it's best not to go back. So instead of it being where they're physically there and interacting with it and walking around and trying to observe it, maybe have it where they're like invisible or incorporeal, where they're just kind of watching this, kind of like they're watching reality TV. However, because of these time distortions that are going on, something that they're not used to, now they're visible to us, and now they can interact with us and touch us versus merely kind of watching it around like it's a hologram.
Which leads to a bit of an unsettling dread, because that implies that the mantis men from the future are always there and visibly watching you. Kind of like Santa Claus, but with extra arms. The only difference is that now we can see them.
My only problem with them is there's nothing that ever explains what these alien monsters are. It's a cool concept, I like it, but without any means of discovering, what they are, and that they're just merely observers from a different time somewhere in the future, it loses a lot of its punch for me. So maybe something could be put into the adventure to explain them. Maybe something in Conley's journal or Eve's spell book, if the investigator find those. Probably not going to have a chance to read that and learn about it until after the adventure's done, but it at least gives the player characters a means of discovering what those random bug people were. Now, speaking of the journal and the spell book, characters can find those hidden in the old barn, and we get some giant 2-page handouts for that. These things are really cool, and I really enjoy having nice handouts for it. But there's also a temporal anomaly where the player characters could encounter Dr. Conley for months before the event, and if they do warn him that something has happened and that there's something going on with Elizabeth and her brother that he warned warned about him in this letter, that they might have done something to him, that can change what is in those journals. So, warning him, it doesn't stop anything from happening. It just has it where he now tells the player characters that he is going to hide his journals under the boards in the blue room, which means that they're not going to be able to find them now in the stables because they've altered the timeline. And if they go there are slightly changed handouts, meaning that, we get these alternative handouts in the journal to reflect the player characters meeting Conley from the past, and I think that is awesome. But a couple things with this.
First, one change that John made that we thought was pretty good is when we went in Dr. Conley's bedroom for the first time, we didn't come across him or anything like that. It was just an empty bedroom. So we searched around, verified there was nothing going on, and we had turned around to leave. But right as we reached the door, suddenly the light swelled in the windows behind us, and we heard him say something behind us, and we turned around, and there he was getting dressed in a mirror. So we're like, "Hey, Dr. Conley, you're alive." And he's all like, "Of course I'm alive. What are you guys doing here?" And that's when we found out that we were talking to Dr. Conley for months and months before, so we kind of caught him up to speed what was going on. And, he told us about some journals that he was going to leave on a bedroom floorboard for us, and we're like, "Hey, Dr. Conley, why don't you introduce us to your girlfriend?" And he was all like, "Hey, that's a great idea. Can you grab me my cane off my bed over there?" So we turned around to grab his cane for him, and there wasn't no cane there. We turned around to him, and Dr. Conley was gone. Well, being the fact that was one of the very first anomalies that we had, that one really freaked us out.
Next, the map has 9 guest rooms on it, but only one is referred to as the blue room because everything inside of it is blue, but the rest are simply bedrooms. So I suggest that you give themes to the other rooms in the house. That way, if the player characters are walking around or they just walk into a room that happens to be blue, it doesn't stick out for any reason because all the rooms have themes. So maybe you could have a yellow room and a green room, flower room, ceiling room, etc., etc. Just jot some themes down on your notes before you run the game, before you run the session. And, that way when they walk into a room, they say, "Hey, what does this look like?" You can have a ready-made answer for them. Now, one criticism that I have about it is uncovering the plot itself. We've got this time suit and all these anomalies going on, but instead of the anomalies being only physical manifestations, maybe we could change that up and have it where some of those anomalies are kind of like phantoms that are just replaying incidents that have happened in the house, kind of like recordings that just kind of happen randomly and over. Now, these could be mundane things, like you could have a player character walking down a hallway, turning around and seeing themselves kind of transparently walking in those same steps, maybe a second or two behind them, kind of like tracers. Like they could see these tracers following people whenever certain anomalies are happening. Or they could see something that's caught in a loop and it's just replaying over and over again. Maybe they're glitchy and not always in focus, but they could have some key conversations going on, such as when Dr. Conley overheard the conversation between Eve and Clint. Maybe they can see this phantom Dr. Conley kind of kneeling in a hallway listening in a keyhole, and if the player characters step through the door, they get to witness this conversation that could put a lot of these events in motion. However, if the player characters look, they're going to see that Eve is blonde now and Clint has a mustache and longer hair, so maybe require that the players make a spot hidden roll to recognize them, or maybe do a listen check to recognize their voices, or be able to really clearly make out what the words are because the volume is kind of rolling higher and lower, maybe skipping around a second or two there, kind of distorting and getting twitchy because they're kind of watching a very strange sort of recording.
Same thing could be done with that scene of Dr. Conley getting shot, right? Like you could have him be in the library and he's wearing his time suit and he's kind of looking off to the side. He's going, "Wait, David, what are you doing? Stop!" And he falls over dead. And then that happens again and again and again. It's got to be worth a sanity point or two.
Now, in case when things get weird, if the player characters decide that they just want to leave the property and get the hell out of here, they'll discover that their cars are no longer working as Davis disabled them and he hid the parts in some old paint cans in the laundry room. In fact, I think when they arrive and they see Davis at the door, he's just kind of like on his way out to work on something. And that way, when they go into the library and they're meeting everybody, that's at the same time that he's out there pulling parts out of their car and hiding them in these old rusty paint cans. cans. Now, I also think that there should be a spot hidden roll allowed if the player characters go into the laundry room and they notice these paint cans there, and they can see that they've been recently disturbed. The rings of dust are slightly off, saying that they've been moved, or maybe there's a little bit of trace of wet paint that's along one of the lids or something like that. Just a good clue to help them figure out that somebody's been messing with their paint cans right there, and if they open it up, the last thing they're going to expect is pieces of their cars.
However, instead of doing any of that stuff, you could just have the anomalies be what keeps them on the property, right? Like, they could look outside and they could see some sort of frozen landscape, like it's an ice age out there. And a little bit after that, it could be this barren post-apocalyptic wasteland. And then a little bit after that, it could be this Jurassic jungle that's teeming with dinosaurs. Because you are not going to be able to keep me on that property if I want to go. No broken down car is going to keep me there. But velociraptors? Yeah, those will keep me on the property.
Once the player characters defeat the bad guys, the adventure is done. I suppose it's done. It's kind of like, oh, hey, the player character's got a time suit now, but it can only carry 2 people at a time. And, there's also cases where you could have creatures like the Chalics or Yithians or Hounds of Tindledus might come after the player characters because they've got something that's messing with time. But the anomalies should still be happening. It's not like those ended just because the player characters defeated the bad guy. The module says that the suit's presence is what's causing them, and Dr. Conley had mentioned the anomalies going on before he died, so it was obvious that these were going on even before the suit was fully operational, so once they get the code, those should still be happening.
Yeah, I think destroying the suit is kind of essential for this adventure. You could have it be where they have to enter in the code in order to get it to do some sort of shutdown mode in order to take it apart safely, but it's not like the player characters can just take that suit with them once they got the code, because those time anomalies always happen around the suit, whether it's operational or not, and it's a little dangerous for them to try that.
My other complaint is that I wish there was a way that we could save Dr. Conley. We've got a freaking time machine here. That's got to mean something, right, in order to save our friend's life. So the time suit is supposed to be piloted by thought. That's how you actually control this thing, where you're kind of moving around through the time stream. So what if the temporal anomalies were not the result of the time suit's presence, but if they were because the doctor was wearing the suit when he was shot, and he was still wearing it, and now his mind is trapped inside of it, somewhere kind of outside of time, and it's trying to get out. It's trying to warn everybody about it, and it's just kind of jarring and banging up the timeline as his mind is thrashing about. So that is what's causing the temporal anomalies. So maybe if the player characters could use the suit and go back in time and prevent that murder from happening, or giving him a body that mind could go back into, like they give him Eve or Clint as the new body for this mind that's suddenly without one.
Yeah, it's going to cost me a little bit of sanity to take some jerk and put them in the time suit and send their mind just spinning off into the temporal void for all eternity, and then taking that jerk's body and then taking my friend's mind and putting my friend's mind in it so I could have my friend back. That's got to feel pretty good, so I approve.
You can find the code in Mansions of Madness Volume 1, available in physical form off the Chaosium website or as a PDF off DriveThruRPG. It is a pretty cool adventure, and I've already sung the praises of 2 of the other adventures that are in this collection, so it is definitely worth picking up that book.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. What I think would be pretty cool that you could do in this adventure is, let's say you have a player character die on you, right? Now, normally what you do is you give them an NPC and you say, hey, play this NPC, and that way they get to keep playing and keep having fun. Okay, but what if this time you then handed them a copy of a different player character that's around the table? Because now you got 2 of them because they're like variants from the different timelines, right? I think that would be awesome because now their experiences are kind of dividing and going off different ways. And then if you have another player character die, you just give them a copy of the exact same player character from a different timeline. So now we got 3 of them running around. I think that would be amazing if the whole group was all the same character, except for the original, right? Like they're dead or off in an asylum somewhere because they keep seeing themselves. This sounds like a fantastic campaign setup to me.
The scenario is set in 1925 in upstate New York, but the scenario is set in 1925 and the scenario is set in 1920. I need the loudest airplane in the world to go away first. The scenario is set